All right, welcome back to another episode of Your Platform Podcast. I am here with a guest who I've been shouting out, Alex and Podmatch, for what they're doing because I think that uh, their idea of connecting people, specifically podcasters, guests, and hosts, is brilliant. So it's a big shout out to them. But I came across this gentleman through Podmatch. His name is Aaron Trahan, and he is a performance mindset coach. Correct? Is that the
That's
accurate
right.
accurate way to say it?
Right.
Say it. I
Mhm.
appreciate it. So yeah, Aaron, I appreciate you coming on here with me. My premise in about my show was that I think everybody has a story, in one way or the other. And I like to learn about people's background, and I like to dive into people's mindset. So when you reached out to me and said, "Hey, I might be a good fit for your show," I said, "Absolutely," because I think for what you do is super valuable to not just corporations and leaders in those corporations, but to, I think, just the business person in general, the person like myself who, you know, gets goes through hurdles and these mental roadblocks that don't really know where to start and kind of move forward. And just before we started recording, we talked about atomic habits right behind here, and I'm curious how much of your work bleeds into that. So Aaron, thank you for joining me today. Looking forward to having some good dialogue here.
Absolutely. I appreciate you having me, Paul. And yeah, with some of the dialogue we've already had, it's very excited to have a pretty dynamic value add discussion.
For sure. So listen, let's go ahead and talk to me a little bit about your story, Aaron. Your work. I think you were 15 years plus in corporate leadership. Is that an
Mhm.
accurate statement? Yeah. Talk to me about that journey, kind of where you are now and where you were maybe 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll kind of give the 30,000 foot view of kind of the origin story, the big pivot, and that's kind of led me to the seat that I'm in now. And for me, my journey on leadership started at a pretty young age, just a few short years into my corporate career. I worked my way into the opportunity of being able to assume some leadership responsibilities and got my first leadership role at 23, maybe 24 years old. And as destiny would have it, it was kind of one of those right place, right time scenarios. The company I was working for was, just like a rocket ship. And so I was able to grow within a very fast paced growth environment. So the next 7 to 8 years for me, I was able to quickly scale my way up the corporate ladder, so to speak, to eventually becoming a senior executive of $1 billion publicly traded company by the age of 30. Um, Now, what happened along that journey was I'm confident, I think I've made every mistake you could have possibly made as a young emerging executive. And it kind of got to the point where, for me to reach higher levels, I had to take the tough medicine and realize what got me here is not going to get me there. I needed to really get back focused on my own development and focus
Right.
on those weakness areas that, success can mask a lot of things, right? And
Yeah.
your
For
ego
sure.
inflates. You stop doing some of the things that you did when you were driven and hungry. I stopped. I kind of found myself in a position where I stopped growing. I wasn't coachable. I wasn't, doing the things that were driving continuous improvement. And I knew that I wasn't operating anywhere close to my full potential. And so I went out and got some external help. I was committed to getting back into growth mode. And to make a long story short, this is where the big pivot came from. And through coaching, I realized that one of the development areas that I had been avoiding was being a more effective leader. We don't come out of college knowing how to lead people and lead teams and lead complex organizations, and leadership is an acquired skill. Um, so that was the big moment where I made the transition of stop focusing just on me and how I could advance and what promotions and more money I could get, and started focusing on the we. What if I made everyone around me better? What if I could be the springboard for other people to help them leap from their version of good to their version of great? And that's led me to kind of where I'm at now. That process of converting a weakness into a superpower led to me having a deep interest in performance coaching and helping others tap into new levels of performance. And I eventually launched my own performance coaching firm a couple years ago. Now I get to do that work full time, working with entrepreneurs, working with executive leaders, really helping them find those elusive performance breakthroughs. And back to your opening, it all starts with mindset, right? And so that's really where, in my particular methodology, is really where I focus on making sure that the mindset is in place, not just the growth mindset. Thinking and believing won't take you very far, but it's more about the performance mindset and taking the actions that we know are required to help us find that next level of improvement,
Right.
helping us get better.
Right. Aaron, you mentioned, back when you were kind of moving up that ladder, that you got to a point of, hey, I'm kind of, I'm not almost like not motivated to kind of take that next leap. What was going on in your life that maybe you do you think contributed to that, or was there external things that were going on? I was listening to Jay Shetty yesterday. He
Mhm.
was on he was on Tom Bilyeu's Impact Theory podcast.
Yeah.
I love both of them and what they do. And he had mentioned that there's the three E's that he says it was the energy, the environment. The biggest thing from that was the environment that I took from his, that he needed to change to change his kind of style. Was there
Right.
anything in your environment then that you think contributed to the way you were feeling at that point?
Yeah, yeah. I think to summarize the answer to the question was is really thinking about the downside of success, right? Like
Mm,
what led me to that point was actually the thing that we're all chasing,
mm,
and that's
yeah,
success. But here's what nobody tells you when you're on your path to achieving it, and that is that success will always breed complacency.
yes,
And the important thing that we have to remember is don't think that you're going to be the exception. Don't think it's
mm,
not going to happen to you. It's far easier to become complacent on the other side of success achievement because you now have the resume, you got the track record, you got the status, the title, the money in the bank, whatever it is. It is a hell of a lot easier to get complacent once those things happen versus when you don't have those things and you're aggressively chasing it. I tell people all the time, listen to what professional sports teams say. They all will tell you that it's far more difficult to repeat as champions than it was to win the title the first time.
right, right,
Companies say the exact same thing. It's far more difficult to sustain and maintain number one market share and industry dominance than it was when you were the underdog kind of coming up. And so, yeah, for
right.
me, it was not staying present to continuous improvement, not focused on continuing to develop, and kind of letting that success open the door for complacency to set in.
It's funny that you say that, and it actually reaffirms what I've been echoing over several episodes with some of my guests I've been talking to about my experience with specifically this podcasting.
Mm,
And to just kind of again briefly state it, I've gotten to a point with the podcast where, and for those who know, and I think I shared with you that I am a newer podcaster. I've just started and just launched, 3 months ago or so. But for the first time in my life, or I guess a very long time, I've experienced what it means to break through comfort or discomfort, because editing this video takes a long time. Jumping on and preparing, doing these interviews take time. It takes a lot of time to actually prepare and get to know you and schedule. It takes a lot of time. Becomes overwhelming, but I
mm,
started, and I can see the result that it's bringing me by continuously pushing through. And I think that there's this misconception, Aaron, that once we get through a level of, push through that level of comfort or success, if you will, like you explain it, that it's just going to get easy.
right.
It's not, and it shouldn't be, because that's where you get to that next level. That's where you build on. So I love that you just shared that. Um, Aaron, quickly, in your work that I've come across, I took some notes here and I jotted here. So 40% of leaders don't reach their full potential and capability um, in their work. Is that I
That's right.
think that's kind of how I gathered and jotted down the
Yeah,
notes
yeah.
here.
This
What's
is
that
all.
mean?
Yeah, this is all derived from a global survey that was done, really focused on asking mid-level and senior level leaders one simple question: what percent of your full potential are you expressing in your day-to-day leadership role? And the answer that came back, um, may be surprising for some, may not be, but it was, the average response was less than 40%. And so,
Wow.
said differently, global leaders are openly admitting that they're only operating at about a third of what they know their full potential and capability to be. And yeah, I think it's, you know, it, the big message here is growth and comfort will never coexist.
Sure.
And so, why are so many leaders operating far below their full potential? And in most cases, especially, and look, guilty as charged. I've experienced this, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Is on the other side of success, we tend to start choosing a little bit more comfort over
Mhm.
growth. And just like you mentioned, of kind of going through and breaking through the barriers with your own podcast, you simply can't have both. So
Right.
if you're going to choose comfort, choose stability, choose predictability, then you're compromising growth. Growth
Right.
is not meant to be comfortable. It was never designed for you to feel comfortable when you're growing.
Right.
The greatest growth we're all going to experience is when we venture to the outer edges of our current capabilities, right? When we're challenged the most, when we're stretched the most, when we're being pressed the most. That's when that performance breakthrough or that new level of growth is going to come out. And so, for those that really want to seek continuous improvement and growth, I know it's kind of a cliche thing to say, but it's absolutely true. And you're just going to have to get more comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yeah, that's exactly right, and that's what I mean, like, that saying finally makes sense for me,
Hmm.
and to be completely honest, I sit around and I'm thinking things, "Okay, now I'm feeling." I was telling my buddy the other day, I said, "I think anxiousness, it just means that you're uncomfortable, or that you need to push past that uncomfort." And I don't dismiss anybody who deals with some severe anxiety or anything like that, but
Hmm.
I think that there is a level of being able to kind of walk through or coach yourself through it, realizing like, "Hey, what have I done that was uncomfortable, and I broke through that." So let's jump into the performance mindset. If you can, for me, define exactly what the performance mindset is, and how do you describe it to leaders that you are encountering it and coaching them through that piece?
Yeah. Yeah, I like to answer this question by kind of taking a step back. And I think we've all by now, because of the great work that Carol Dweck, the psychologist from Stanford, has done, I think we're all pretty familiar with a growth mindset, right?
Mm.
I think we're all striving to have a growth mindset.
Right.
Every time that I speak and present to groups, when we talk about growth mindset, which is the internal belief that with the proper amount of time, energy, and effort, you can build your abilities, you can enhance your skills, you can grow your intelligence. It's that belief that nothing's fixed, and with the right work and perseverance, you can grow anything,
Right.
right? When I ask a room who identifies with a growth mindset, 70 to 80% of hands shoot up. Yep, that's me, all about growth. It's like I've got a growth mindset. But here's what I've noticed over the years and why I've decided to kind of create this new subcategory called the performance mindset. And that is when you double click on that group, that, let's just say the 70% that raises their hand, when you really start examining their habits, their behaviors, their routines, their approach, they're not doing all that much different than those that we kind of those individuals we look at and say they have a fixed mindset,
Right.
right? they
Right.
they don't want change, they don't want to grow. And so thinking and believing is one thing, but as we kind of think about the key differentiator between a growth mindset and a performance mindset, it comes down to taking action.
Mm.
Are you prepared to leave the comfort zone? Regardless of the amount of success that you've had, are you going to continue to look out the front windshield, finding out how much more you're capable of? What bigger impact can you make? Or are you going to get comfortable and kind of rest on your resume, rest on your past achievements? Those with a performance mindset have an incredibly strong bias for action. And guess what? The best leaders on the planet, all of them, if you've done anything spectacular, you look at the Elon Musk of the world, the Steve Jobs of the world, you fill in the blank of a great leader that's made a big impact. They have an incredibly strong bias for action. They don't wait around seeking permission to take action. They don't hesitate. They sure as hell don't procrastinate. They lead and push things forward through taking action, right?
Mm,
And so when you think about a performance mindset, it's that internal commitment that you've made to yourself to always find that continuous improvement. And I think, using that book that's on the shelf behind you, James Clear in Atomic Habits makes very clear on that 1% better every day,
that's right.
right?
That's
It's
right.
so easy to say, but it's extraordinarily difficult to stay that focused, stay that uncomfortable, take on those challenges that force you to keep getting better. And so, what thinking and believing is to a growth mindset, action is to a performance mindset. And I tell people all the time, you can read all the books you want, listen to all the podcasts, you can go to all the conferences. Having those growth beliefs and that growth mindset is great. I'm not knocking it by any means. But if you don't put action behind those growth beliefs, you're very likely to be in a very similar position 1 year from now as you are today. Thinking and believing alone will not take you very far. Everything always comes down to taking action.
How do you so two things I got and I'll ask you. So
Mhm.
you had mentioned that you having to prepare to take action. How can one prepare to take action? I think that's the hardest piece for most people. Like you
Mhm.
just mentioned, it's moving forward. But if there's a practical way or an example that you can share for listeners to say, all right, this is we'll go back to James Clear. These are two small things you can do over the next X amount of time to take to prepare to take action. What would you recommend?
Yeah, I think it kind of starts with, first mindset, right? It's like let's take that statement that you just made. Let's apply some pressure to it.
Mhm,
There's always going to be reasons to not take action.
for sure.
You'll always be able to make a lot of lists. Let's look at your exact scenario. There are plenty of reasons, whether it be because of your professional role or you wanted to kind of get more comfortable. There's reasons for you to not make the progress that you're making
That's
in
right.
the podcast arena because you're waiting for more knowledge, you're waiting for more experience. And so, sometimes it's just having the mindset that whether you think you can or think you can't, you'll always be
You
right.
that's
And
right.
it's sometimes you don't need a good reason. Sometimes you just got to commit to taking that first step and acknowledging that waiting on the perfect moment, waiting on the perfect scenario, waiting on the quote unquote right time. How many people have you heard, I'll start my diet on Monday or
All
I'll
the
wait
time.
till January 1? It's like,
That's right.
guess what? That's just
That's
an
right.
excuse to not
Mm,
take action
mm,
because every action, every first step will be imperfect.
right.
Like that's something that we've got to wrap our minds around that there is no perfect action.
Mhm,
Every single action has an element of imperfection to it. But guess what sits on the other side of that? We then learn, we gain
right.
experience, we gain competence, we gain confidence that then allows us to take that second step a bit more easy. That third step becomes even easier, the fourth, even easier. But something that your audience can take away from a tangible way to really understand at least what first step to take in what direction. I kind of come back to kind of a little exercise that I refer to as the potential gap, right? And so I want everybody to think about the level that you are currently operating at. Let's just call that our current location
Mm,
and compare that to the level that you know deep down in your core that you're fully capable of. The gap between these two data points represents our potential. It's no different than opening up your phone and looking at Google Maps, right? The only way you'll ever be able to have that tool give you an optimized route from point A to point B is by being able to plug in your current location and your destination. So if you're looking for a place to start, really understand what what this potential gap looks like for you. What are you fully capable of? What does your best version look like? And what can be something
Mhm.
that you can do today to take action that doesn't represent where you're currently at, but represents that person that you know, that professional, that leader that you know deep down you're fully capable of. And the more evidence that you can start stacking through actions today that represent that future version is going to be the very thing that closes that gap. Don't sit around waiting for the perfect moment or the perfect opportunity, or things are crazy right now with work or the economy or whatever
Right,
excuse
right,
that mind's going to come up with, because they'll always be there.
right.
It's comes down to, are you willing to take that first imperfect step or not to bridge that potential gap?
Well, I'm just curious what your thoughts are because I just had this thought because we just referenced Atomic Habits, but he also says, one day better over 365 days, you're 37% better than you were a year ago. But
Mhm.
also, it can work in reverse. Do you think that there is a level of inaction that we've taken that has compounded into this force that is a lot that is setting us back?
Oh, 100%. I think compounding works both ways, right? And so the
Mhm.
1% rule is it's easy to look at that and apply it to ourselves, looking at the trajectory of up and to the right, but it can also go the opposite way.
Mhm.
And inaction, or finding the excuses, or waiting for the perfect moment, that also compounds on itself.
Right,
So when you don't take action today, guess what happens? It makes it that much easier tomorrow to not take action again.
right.
So this whole notion of, I'm going to wait till Monday, or I'm waiting till next month, I'm waiting for a perfect time, that should almost be a warning. A warning bell should go off in your head, because that that's just an excuse.
Right,
We can either make excuses or we can make progress,
right.
but you can't do both. And so a lot of people try to bridge that of, well, I'm going to start here. Or
Sure.
that whole excuse that we generate for waiting to take action almost should be the fuel for you to start taking action immediately, because it's going to go both ways. Taking action today makes taking action tomorrow easier,
Mhm.
but inaction today also makes inaction tomorrow easier as well.
I
The
love that.
choice is ours.
I love that. I was following your work, and obviously after we introduced each other through Podmatch, I was kind of going across your blogs and stuff, and your Instagram and Facebook, and I think they call that stalker in 2024. Huh? What really it was me to get some insights into what you do and what
Hmm.
what your work is, and you had mentioned. I wrote this down. So the idea of working smarter, not harder, is it's quite ridiculous. And two, that motivation is overrated. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I'll take the first one first. And yeah, I think, haven't we all kind of grown up by saying work smarter, not harder, right?
Mhm. I still hear it too to this day.
Oh,
Like,
all the time,
yeah,
all the time. And my message is pretty simple, is no one has ever achieved anything great without hard work.
right.
And so I know the spirit of that phrase is to optimize and be efficient. But my warning to a lot of people is, never ever find a solution that is going to be a substitute for hard work.
Mhm.
Like, don't trick yourself into thinking that that exists, because guess what? If you're focused only on working smarter and not harder, you'll always get beat by someone who's prepared to do both.
Right.
And, I think what's interesting is when you look at the lifespan of someone's professional career that's achieved a whole lot, work smarter, not harder is usually what shows up at the very end, right? Like, think about
Mhm.
how it really works.
Right, right.
At first, early in your career, you have to work hard,
Of course.
right? Because without that hard work, without working not so smart, you'll never gain the experience and the knowledge to then be able to find out how to work smarter.
Mm,
So there's really three stages that I continue to see play out. Is stage one is working really hard and not so smart. You gain the experience, you gain the knowledge, you gain the insights to then be able to work hard at working smarter. And only then, after we've kind of reached a level of success, have we given ourselves the option to, if we want to slow down, to then only work smart but not hard. But if you start there at that third stage, it's really the first two stages that build your career, that build your legacy, that build your trajectory. And so I guess the big point here is don't think you'll ever be able to avoid hard work and
mm,
achieve something great. Because behind every great achievement comes with a hell of a lot of hard work. And I think that kind of dovetails into the second one is that, you know, we've also been taught to believe that you need to be a motivated leader. You got to motivate people. You got to, motivation's great. But when you really start peeling the layers of the onion back, motivation's kind of a fraud, right? I think
mhm.
it's when you think about launching any new project, any new initiative, motivation's always there at the beginning, but it fades very quickly.
Yeah.
So, what I challenge my clients with is we have to be able to replace motivation with discipline. Motivation is kind of the sugar high. Discipline is going to be the sustainable fuel source. And so, a little exercise I like to take people through is think about if you were hiring motivation as an employee. What would their resume say? It would tell you, I only want to work part time. I only want to show up when things are exciting. So, right at the very start, kind of in the planning phases before the work really starts, when you need me the most is when I'm less likely going to be there
Mhm.
and I'm highly inconsistent. That's the resume for motivation. So, think about yourself. If you are dependent on motivation to perform at your highest level, you at best will be an inconsistent performer. If you replace that with discipline, you've got your roadmap, kind of thinking back to that potential gap, where you're currently operating at and where you know you're fully capable of. What are the things that must be true for you to reach that full capability and full potential? Then you just stay disciplined to executing that plan. Even when you least feel like doing what's required to get better, discipline will always be there. It's motivation that will be nowhere found to help you on that journey when things get a little bit tough. When you wake up with that scratchy throat, when don't have the energy, motivation is going to tell you in its resume that yeah, those are going to be those time periods. I'm not going to be there, bro. Don't
Right,
don't
right.
look at
Yeah.
me.
I love that. And I think to piggyback off that is, I think consistency, right? I asked somebody this about 6 months ago. He's had quite the physical transformation in his life, and I
Mm.
said, "Man, what are you doing?" He goes, "Discipline and consistency," and I just never understood what that meant, Aaron. And I think that consistency comes first. Goes back to the tiny little habits. If you're doing those day in and day out, and you realize after 30 days you did these things day in and day out, you were disciplined. But consistency breeds discipline. I think that's the key there. Can you
Mhm.
provide for me, Aaron, a specific example that you specifically used to step out of your comfort zone for personal growth?
Yeah, yeah. For me, it really comes down to just making sure that I'm staying uncomfortable, getting better,
Mm,
right? And what that shows up for me is, I hold myself accountable to continued education, right? If performance coaching is what I do and that's my craft, how am I getting better at that? And so I
right.
give myself a quarterly quota, right? And there's going to be a certain number of books that I commit to in my field. There's going to be a certain number of podcasts. I'm always going to look for a new course or certification every single quarter that's going to help me take another step forward, right? It doesn't matter if my business is growing at over 50%, 90%, whatever it is, it's easy to sit back and say, oh, great, look, my efforts are finally paying off. But I have within my system of priorities continuous improvement as
Mm,
a key feature there because I'm always asking the question, especially knowing from the experience that I've been through before of how success can breed complacency. What am I going to commit to for this quarter to get better, to sharpen my skills, to improve and become an even better master at my craft? And then kind of back to that is I'm wildly disciplined to executing those things. It's the kind of one of the biggest values that I have, and that is I want to hold myself accountable to continuing to improve. And so what that looks like is for me continuing to be better at my craft. And I'm doing that through further education,
love that.
further reading. I really make sure I calibrate what I'm consuming. And so,
Yeah,
for me, I'm listening to a couple of podcast episodes per week of just listening to other people coach, right? There's podcast out there where you can listen to a coach and a client kind
that's
of
cool.
go through a session. And I've got 700 plus hours of active coaching under my belt, and I'm still doing this on a
Yeah,
weekly
yeah.
basis. So when I talk to new coaches and I ask them how they're improving, how they're growing, how they're really expanding their business, I kind of give them insight that I'm this far into the game, and I shouldn't be outworking you to be better as a coach, right?
Right,
So
right.
yeah, just helping people set the bar of what continued, the standard of excellence looks like.
Mhm.
And I'm always making sure that I'm moving mine up. I'm not keeping it static. And so when you think about the standard of excellence we all set for ourselves, a good question we can always ask ourselves is, am I continuing to increase that bar? Or is that bar at the same level today as it was last year? And
Right.
if it's at the same level and growth is your initiative, you've got a contradiction there that you need to kind of resolve.
You're comfortable.
That's
So it
right.
goes back
That's
to
right.
I think
It's exactly it. You got comfort showing up in your strategy.
yeah. Yeah. So, what you just said, I think is going to lead me to what I was really interested in learning more about was the 3 out high performance formula that you have on your
Mm.
profile, which is out prepare, outwork, and outlearn. And I am too. I agree with education over entertainment. I think is where you are going to level up and take it to the next level. And I think just knowing to not or me for me I would say is not thinking I know everything. I look back at my younger self, and when I say younger self I mean yesterday. I
Right.
look at myself and say, man, I feel like sometimes I know it all, and not that I know it all, but I just feel like I'm at a point sometimes where I feel prepared enough, but I'm not, because I'm not. There's a continuous education that goes with life in general, right?
Mhm.
um Walk me through, if you can, and elaborate for me those 3 outperformance formula,
Yeah.
and what that actually does and means for the work that you do and the people that you bring it to.
Sure. Sure. Where this started was I continued to really examine my environment. I really wanted to distill down, why do some leaders continue to find new levels of success and continue to grow and grow and grow? And then what prevents some leaders from doing that, where they kind of reach a certain level and they just kind of like plateau out and kind of stop growing. And I really wanted to examine that first cohort and say, if I could distill what they're doing that's a common thread into a formula, what would it be? What are the
Right,
handful of things that every single one of them are doing? And it came down to these three things. First, they out prepare everyone around them, right? And I think another way to kind of think about preparation is by, not only is it doing the due diligence, dotting the I's, crossing the T's, being prepared for worst case scenario, but there's a huge element of reflection in there where they're constantly evaluating, how did things occur compared to my expectation? What did I get wrong? What did I learn in the process that I didn't know that I can apply to get better the very next day, the very next week? And so it's really staying in that moment of time of just always reflecting on how you can better prepare for the next rep, the next week, the next scenario, whatever it may be. But what did I learn from this that I can apply to get better the very next time, right? I think it's just they were constantly better prepared than everyone around them. Number two was they outworked everybody. And I don't want this to be some hustle culture speak where they walked around with a badge of honor on their shoulder saying, I work 80 hours a week. It's not about the quantity of time, it's much more about the productivity and the efficiency on simply just getting more done. They found leverage on their time. They were able to understand what are those key areas that I can deliver exponential impact and value in, and how can I do more of that? How can I 2x and 3x my bandwidth to doing those two things? And what that forced them to do is say no to a lot of the things that they actually wanted to do or maybe found
Right.
exciting, but they had such a high level of prioritization and focus that they were just far more productive, far more efficient, and got more leverage on their time. So what it
Sure.
showed up as, they just were able to outproduce and outwork everybody. Number three, arguably the most important, was they outlearn everyone around them. They don't let their success, they don't let their experience kind of lull them into a place of thinking they got everything figured out. They're committed to stay being learn it alls and not know it alls. And so it's interesting to see this in real time. It's those leaders that show up to a meeting, and even though they may be the highest ranking, highest paid person in the room, they're there taking in things like a sponge. They're
Right.
willing to learn and bring in new ideas and concepts from junior level employees. There's just almost this humbleness to them that, they're always open to better ideas, better solutions, and if this will increase performance, they just stay in learning mode. And so when I kind of sat back and said, and I'll ask this to the audience, now that I've explained that, have you ever seen anyone in your network or you're associated with do these three things consistently and not found greater levels of success? I've yet to have anyone produce me an example of someone that consistently
Right.
outprepares, outworks, and outlearns and didn't grow and succeed at higher and higher levels.
How much I'm curious what your thoughts are on how much you think that technology is aiding in the comfort zone, and just from your perspective, like, so yes, technology is very great to have. I mean, I use it for my daily work. It does campaigns for me for insurance. It can help me with emailing blasts and things like that, stuff that will make it efficient. But in terms of learning and work, or even just research, I should just throw out there, because you just mentioned the preparation that it would take to, uh, like you said, dot your I's and cross your T's. The preparation is doing the work. Maybe going to Google and popping in something that they are trying to accomplish, and maybe they get a result back that it's the first one, but there's not further research to maybe elaborate on that idea, to develop more of a more critical thought pattern. How much of
Mhm.
that do you think plays into this?
Yeah, I think I think it's a double edged sword, right? I
Mhm.
think technology, like I tell people all the time, I wish like hell I had Google when I was in college. Like
Yeah,
Google didn't even exist.
yeah.
Now they've got Chat GPT, and so it's pretty wild.
Yeah,
I guess the message here is don't take shortcuts.
right.
Because if you do, it's always going to show up in the work, right?
Mhm.
When you get two people with equal level of talent, equal level of opportunity, same place, same company, whatever. I mean, you just create a level playing field, and one is using maybe technology to get that surface level data point, whatever it may be, but they're not going deep, where the other one is going deeper. They have command of the information. They know how to convert information into intelligence and being able to use that and apply that to then generate better results, better performance, better leverage, better efficiency the warning here is that if you take shortcuts, it's always going to show up in performance at
Yeah.
some point in time, because you're very likely to be outperformed by someone who isn't. Because I kind of like to think about this as your preparation, your experience, your knowledge, your intelligence. Those are things that can't be taken away from you.
Right.
And so if you're getting a data point here or there just to say something that looks good into a meeting, but you really don't have an understanding or grasp of the foundation information, it's going to show up at some point, especially when you're competing against or find yourself in a room with others that are deep matter experts in a particular topic or subject. You can find yourself, you know, you can find yourself as kind of the emperor who has no clothes when the tide gets pulled back pretty quickly. And I think that's the danger with things like Chat GPT, right? I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
for 20 bucks a month, anybody can enter in a prompt and get back a response they can copy and paste.
Hmm.
That sounds really, really good, right?
Right.
But if you're having Chat GPT fluff up your resume or some type of research report, whatever it is, but
Hmm.
then you have to go out there and without the technology, being able to speak to it and apply it in different ways, and everyone finds out it's like, you don't know what you're talking about.
Right.
I think it's just a big warning to not let it create shortcuts for doing the work.
For sure. You had mentioned the downsides of success and uh, the adverse effect that it guess it has on an
Mhm.
individual. Um, can you speak to how you help leaders navigate through that or manage
Yeah,
it?
yeah. I think it really shows up in four key areas, right? And a lot of where my work starts is really helping make sure that complacency from success doesn't allow your current success to be the very thing that jeopardizes your future success and performance. And where I see it show up the most is around feedback. Um, so I love to ask the question, how open are you to receiving feedback? Because here's exactly what happens that I see almost across the board with successful leaders is once a leader reaches a certain level of success, they develop a tendency to listen to the things that they want to hear and lose the willingness to listen to the things that they most need to hear that would help them improve and develop. And so I always like to challenge leaders like, tell me about the quality of your feedback loops. How are you getting feedback? How are you, avoiding blind spots? Because as you become successful, you start creating an echo chamber around you. You're only listening to the things that you want to hear. Blind spots will eventually form. And blind spots to a leader are like cigarettes to the body, they will
That's huge.
slowly kill you. And so, if you're not getting the right level of feedback, if you're not curious to go ask the tough questions, it really comes down to one simple thing. And I try to give all the leaders I work with a quota. And the quota is how many times a week or month can you ask someone, how can I get better? That
Mm,
simple question will unlock so much insight and wisdom. And you may not agree with the feedback. You may not feel that it can be helpful, but don't take the feedback personally, but take it seriously because there's always going to be wisdom to be found in whatever response comes back to the question of how can I improve? And over time, if you're asking that question enough to the right stakeholders that can give you some pretty insightful answers on how to improve, and this is not saying you're doing a bad job, this is not saying that you're not executing at a high level today, it's back to having that commitment to continuous improvement. And by simply asking the question, how can I improve? You can build yourself a blueprint on how to get better the very next day, the very next week, the very next month. But a lot of successful leaders may either have an ego or too much pride to really ask that question as frequently as they need to.
I love that. Listen, Aaron, we have a few minutes here. I'm curious, what, again, going back to this being your platform, I'm curious on what impact you're trying to make, Aaron.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer that the world needs more great leaders.
Mhm.
And the impact that I want to make is making that dent and helping kind of back to that number we talked about earlier. I think leaders admitting that they're only showing up, giving about a third, less than 40% of their full potential and capability is almost a sin, right? I mean, when you look at leadership, I think the responsibility and that just comes with being able to lead people and lead teams is such an awesome responsibility to have. And I think there is a rent that is due to be a leader for other people. I think 99% of people want to follow or be led, and 1% of people are really truly capable of leading them. But I think what also shows up in that number is a lot of people getting bad leadership, which then, hey, if they got a bad leader and they're not feeling invested in, they're not feeling supported, they're not feeling like the leader's helping them get to the next level, why would you show up and give more than 30% of your full potential? And the one thing I can guarantee you is the teams will always follow the leader. So if the leader is only showing up giving 30 to 40%, do you really believe that the teams underneath them are giving more than that?
That's right.
Absolutely not. So if I can help leaders increase and close that gap between the level they're currently operating at to the level that they know deep down they're fully capable of, I think that's going to be an impact that can spread to their teams, to their managers, and spreads all the way down throughout an organization or association. And I feel like that's part of the mission that I'm on is being a change agent to drive that number up.
That's great, Aaron. So, what advice would you have? So, yes, you moved up the ladder yourself. You are now working with leaders, but what about those? And I'll say specifically for someone like myself, who I have held leadership roles, as
Mhm.
manager of some retail companies, and I was head baseball coach of a varsity at a very young age, 22, and then I was a manager at 25. But I've always seen myself as someone being a leader and
Yeah.
wanting to lead and really kind of taking it to that next level. But back to what we were saying earlier in our conversation is that there's a level of comfort that we don't push through. What advice do you have for me? I'll say me specifically because this is for me.
Mhm.
uh, w- w- Someone who wants to be a leader. What would you suggest for me to take it from where I am now, like you said earlier, from good to great?
Yeah, I think the first thing is really embracing the concept that growth and comfort do not coexist, right? And we always search for comfort when there is a fear of failure, right? So when there's a fear of failure, what do we normally gravitate to? Something of comfort where we can lower that risk of failure, but there's no growth there, right? And so part of really adopting the growth and comfort do not coexist is really kind of thinking about failure, right? And we've been led to believe through our the vast majority of our upbringings that we don't want to fail. We only want to win. We want to get the medal. We want to get the rings. We want to get whatever it is, like always be on the winning side. I want to challenge that. It's like, failure is not the opposite of success. Failure is part of the journey towards success, right? And so imagine if you completely change the definition in your head of what failure represents. For 99.99% of us, failure means not achieving, falling short, not reaching our goal. What if instead we started to define failure as not trying? Not
Mm,
taking that step, not making that move, not moving forward. What if that's how we define failure? Because something you're going to realize with failure is before we take action, it's going to look like this vast ocean, a mile wide and super, super deep. But what happens when we start taking action, we take that first step, we oftentimes realize that that ocean that we're perceiving is just a puddle that's half of an inch thick, right? Or half an inch deep. And so fear of failure will always be beaten the second you start taking action, right? And so don't let the fear of failure of not achieving, make it more about not trying, not taking that action, and staying away from comfort and opting for growth.
Love that. So we talked about the performance mindset, the coaching that you do. We talked a lot about the comfort zone, which I love, and I think for again the listeners and for myself, that's why I did this show. And we talked about your three out method for high performance, and we're wrapping up here with navigating through some success and failures. But before we let you go, Aaron, is there anything that we did not touch on that you would have asked if I was sitting in your seat and you were sitting in mine?
No, I think I think those are all great questions. The one thing I would say is, you know, I think there's an opportunity to really kind of think about, for all of us, how we can continue getting better,
Mm,
right? And I think that's such an important thing that gets overlooked. Is sure, we all may, if you were asked the question, do you want to get better? I wouldn't, I don't think I would have anybody say to me, no, I don't want to get better. In my almost 20 years of leading high performance teams, I have never had a leader come up to me and say, I don't want to get better. Right? I think we all have that internal desire to make an even bigger impact than we are today. But so few people are doing the things necessary to get better. And so one of the things I'll kind of leave you with is kind of a bonus gift for the audience is I have a breakthrough performance assessment that I like to give my clients. And we really look at an assessment in four key areas that are most effective in determining a leader's ability to get better. So, for anybody listening to this that wants to see what this assessment about is zero risk. It's a free assessment. Feel free to book an assessment call with me, and I'll walk you through this absolutely at no cost for you to be able to have and always be able to audit and assess yourself. Are you scoring in a way that's going to lead to you getting better or not? And so, just a free kind of a bonus that I kind of want to throw out there for your audience that, yeah, is able to book time with me, get access to this assessment, and really make sure that you're doing the things that are required for you to get better, not just saying that you want to do it and not taking any action behind it.
lovely. So I'll make sure I'll include that in the description. Aaron, where can people find you?
Yeah, I think the two places that I hang out the most is going to be LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out there. Let's connect. Let's have some dialogue. I'm constantly trying to give value added insights through that channel, and then also my website where you can learn more about me, my specific approach, my methodology. That's where you can find my blog that I kind of post on a weekly basis of just trying to really provide value with shaping the mindset and creating new insights on how to actually improve and get better for you to think about the percentage that you're expressing in your potential in your day-to-day leadership roles continues to increase far above that miserable 30% number that seems to be impacting so many leaders around the world right now.
Awesome. Listen, Aaron, I really appreciate your time. I thought this was a fabulous episode. I'm going to continue to follow you and the work that you put out there, and maybe we can, because there's some things that I missed here that I wanted to ask you, but maybe we'll do another episode down the road for that.
Absolutely, Paul.
All right,
I
man. Take
appreciate
care.
you having me.
Yep.